Go.
Hello, this is Glenn Maurer, and I'm here today with Bud Booth, and we're going to do another episode of The Next Step. The subject matter for today is euphemistically called Defense Department greed, or defense budget greed, and we're speaking of the appetite of the military and for a huge increasingly share of American production. Right now in the United States, 57% of federal discretionary spending, at least 57%, is spent on the military and what they call the Defense Department. That means that there's not money available for other things that are much more humane, much more productive, much more basic to our nature. I think I want to start with a quote from Dwight David Eisenhower, hardly a man that is known to be too touchy-feely liberal, but here's what he said: "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired is a theft from those who hunger." You know, if a man like Dwight David Eisenhower, who was Allied commander in World War II and observed war at close range, and certainly was in charge of a military, can appreciate that, then I think we should be listening to those words and not have forgotten them over the last few decades, as we seem to have done so. Right now, the United States of America accounts for over 40% of the world's military expenditures. 40%, one nation alone. China is about 9.6%. Of that, Russia is about 5.2%. The United States spent at least $682 billion a year on what we call defense, probably higher because of the black budgets. China spends $166 billion, Russia about $91 billion. NATO, the combined NATO forces, of which we're the primary and unifying military member, over $1 trillion, almost $1 trillion a year on defense, as compared to, so there's a huge amount of money being spent, most of it by the United States. So, Bud, you were in the military in World War II and have been an observer of the military since. Is this something new in American politics, or something that we have been seeing?
Well, I was thinking the other day about the planes that we flew, and thousands of them in World War II, and just one F-35 fighter would probably cost more than all the 8th Air Force planes that bombed Germany. And this is just beyond belief. Now, granted that the planes that bombed Germany were very unsophisticated, but the F-35 is as sophisticated as is possible to make, and it is not really used as a fighter plane, although they call it a fighter plane, because the true fighter planes were two planes fighting against each other, or the one fighter plane trying to shoot down the bombers of another fighter plane. So it's beyond belief what our military is costing. And to start out, I might say that the military-industrial complex the cost is, as Glenn just pointed out, is beyond belief compared to what the military in the rest of the world spends. And I should add that it's not to defend our country. I affectionately call it the Department of Offense, because the chance it had to defend our country was in 9/11, and it fell flat on its face there. So it's used as an offensive weapon. And another thing I might add, that what the military asks for from Congress is X amount of money, but what the Congress appropriates is X plus amount of money. In other words, each congressional district wants to get little pieces of the action, and they add money to the budget that the Department of Defense presents to the Congress. So later on, I'll just show you some information from the Defense Communications Agency, which is an organization that tracks what the military does and the money they spend.
Well, I think, perspective, I mean, individual abuses are obvious. The F-35 we'll discuss more, I hope. Other examples of that, but I think we need to hold on to the context here that, as you say, we spend so much money in the United States as part of our economy. We are, among the industrialized nations, we are by far, we spend the largest percentage of our gross domestic product on the military of any other nation on earth, other than, ironically, well, we spend about 4.5% of our gross domestic product. China is about 2.1%. Russia is about the same as us, 4.4%. Except the only exception to those, all the other numbers are 1 or 0.5% or 1% or some token amount. Except Saudi Arabia spends about 9%, and we have this huge army. The United States standing military is about 7.3 military personnel per 1,000 population. Mm-hmm. China is 5.2 per 1,000. Russia is 5.3 per 1,000. So in almost every measure, every metric, we spend more as our gross domestic product. We spend 40% of the world's spending, maybe higher than that, alone. And as part of our alliance with NATO and others, maybe 2/3 of the world's money is spent on Western defense, militarism. And so they get this out of the American public by frightening us, by making us believe that if we don't do this, we will be subject to attack by all of these other nations which have woefully less resource than we do.
There's no way that any country can attack the United States except with a nuclear bomb hidden in an old rusty freighter or in some other means of hitting us with a bomb. But you're talking about the end of the world when you talk about nuclear exchange.
Well, standing armies are not going to stop against these kind of terroristic possibilities or more subtle attacks. I mean, not subtle in the sense of the effect, but certainly you don't need to have an invasion force of ships and airplanes and missiles in order to do immense damage to the United States if they were to take advantage of the type of thing you're describing, some unsophisticated nuclear weapon.
And the United States is the only country in the world that has their military force and bases spread all over the world. Mm-hmm. Russia doesn't. They did one time. They tried to go into Afghanistan at the invitation of the so-called ruler of Afghanistan, and they got beaten back by the United States, who, with its ally, yes, Osama bin Laden was our ally in defeating Russia in their
and the Taliban,
and the
Taliban also. You know, the whole. Well, Osama bin Laden, and because he was access to what they call what now is being called the Taliban, and that's the irony of it all. But you mentioned the U.S. Extension of the U.S. military presence. We have, as best I can gather, and this is probably pretty inadequate because there's so much of this that isn't reported to the public. 781 bases abroad around the world. And they estimate the cost of maintaining those bases around the world, from Azerbaijan or in the islands in the Indian Ocean or anywhere else, in Germany, wherever they are. The cost of maintaining those bases since about 2001, when the War on Terror began, somewhere between $1.8 trillion and $2.1 trillion of money that is being sent out of this country by and large, or certainly into other economies, for the purpose of maintaining an imperial presence around the world, and at the cost of domestic programs and needs that could be met.
Yes. It all started back at the end of World War II when the Allies, namely the Soviet Union and the United States, defeated a country that needed to be defeated. But we have different social means of in our countries. And they are socialist and we are capitalist, but we are socialist in many aspects. We've got Social Security, we've got Medicare, Medicaid, we've got K-12 education, all socialistic things. And Russia is as much capitalistic as we are now. They weren't then, but they are now. So we split up the world into their sphere and our sphere, and that is kind of rearing its ugly head again today. The Cold War is creeping back in to what we had hoped was get rid of.
Well, I think we need to look behind militarism alone. There is an economic incentive for free enterprise corporations involved in this. The cost of these, we continue to sell the American public that we should produce new weapons of war and new weapon systems and maintain these bases, all which benefits a lot of private corporations that we know about. I mean, the military-industrial complex, as you referred to a moment ago, was another Eisenhower quote. He observed that we were becoming corrupted by this mixture of politicians and business communities, and that has gotten no better since he warned about it back in the late 60s, 1959 or 60 when he left office. And others have warned about it too, but it continues because it pays, politicians get paid off by lobbyists and others, and individual states often have war industries based in those states, and they're loath to see them disappear. But this is not something new. Again, it was observed. Another Douglas MacArthur quote that I came across: the powers in charge keep us in a perpetual state of fear, keep us in a continuous stampede of patriotic fervor with the cry of grave national emergency. Always there has been some terrible evil to gobble us up if we are not blindly rallying by furnishing exorbitant sums demanded to these militarists. Yet in retrospect, these disasters never seem to have happened, never seem to be quite real. I'm amazed to hear Douglas MacArthur having these insights, because I don't think of him as being a man of that subtlety. But it's true, anybody who's in the system and steps back for just a moment and observes it realizes the manipulative nature of fear and of the militarists.
Yes, absolutely. And there really is no end in sight, because our Congress is so beholden to the military-industrial complex for their existence. And with that, they get to Congress to vote and elect representatives that will back what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a never-ending spiral.
Well, it is, and what's one of the more interesting events of the last couple of years was the sequester. This quote-unquote unholy alliance between the liberals and the conservatives, between the Democrats and the Republicans, and all of that, in which everybody thought the other side was going to be too chicken to actually go through with it. And what do you know, it happened. And for a year, the Department of Defense was under the same reductions as a result of sequester, mm-hmm. As any other government agency, allegedly a 10% reduction, mm-hmm. Which of course didn't happen. They were allowed to escape the 10% reduction by using unexpended monies from previous budgets, which means that they had hid money from previous years. They had stuffed this aside in unexpended accounts. So they had enough money there for almost 7% of the reduction to be covered. So they didn't have any significant impact. And then they just used black money and other hidden monies to carry them through with almost no reductions in that first year of the sequester. Then they came back and got a new budget passed, which not only undid the sequester, but gave them a 3% increase. And even though at present, Obama and Hagel are talking about reducing the military, what they mean by reducing is reducing growth. They're not talking about actually reducing except a couple, they realize they don't need 440,000 soldiers in the modern time. So they're talking about reducing the size of the standing army, which is bigger than any time since World War II.
Yeah,
Hardly necessary.
yeah, yeah.
So anyway, yes, you're right. There's truth and there's hidden truth. The truth is that the military, the budget in the Pentagon budget continues to grow, and even when, for example, the Obama administration's plan right now that they're talking about reducing the budget in the current Defense Department. Hidden in that is they have acknowledged that they will grow defense spending by $115 billion over the 4 years beginning in 2016. So there's a little temporary hitch as they make some adjustments, but the promise to the Pentagon and to the defense industries is that just go along with us on this little momentary blip and we will give you more money in the future. $116 billion growth in the next 4 years. Plus, there's $85 billion in contingency monies for these secret programs, the black programs, war programs.
Yeah.
So they count that outside of the Pentagon budget. The war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, those were all budgets that didn't get included in the Pentagon budget. So when you talk about the Pentagon budget being 40% or 57 or 60% of the American domestic discretionary money, it's even worse than that because that doesn't include the war budgets.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do
And
about
the
this?
American public is not aware of this, and that's the question is, how do you make the public aware of these exorbitant budgets that are taking away from needed?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are people who understand. Even John McCain, an apologist for the military by and large, he called one of the programs the F-35. I know it's one of your least favorite military expenditures and an example of maybe the worst boondoggle in the history. That's what he called it. John McCain called the program the F-35 fighter strategic bomber, what do they call that thing, one of the great national scandals.
Yeah.
Now, so people see this.
And that's what is pointed out in the these publications that I got here of Center for Defense Information. It's an excellent publication that monitors and tracks what the Department of Offense is doing. The first one says, and I'll just read the headlines, I won't read the whole thing. It says, how the F-35 nearly doubled in price and why you didn't know. World spending on nuclear weapons surpasses $1 trillion per year. Some issues with the F-35 aircraft and the F-35 out of altitude, airspeed, and ideas, but never money. Now, we had an F-15, F-16, and F-18 fighter planes that were better than the Russians, who were the only one that had top draw fighter planes. They were better than that, but that wasn't enough. We had to build a F-22 fighter, and we don't hear anything about the F-22 anymore. It was built, and is I don't know what percentage of the total number that was authorized, what number have been built, but now we're going to the F-35 fighter, which is truly not a fighter plane. We think of fighter planes as I mentioned before, planes that fight with dog fights with each other, like Snoopy and the Red Baron did. But we don't realize that that's not the case anymore. And fighters also used to shoot down bombers, which we know so many of our bombers get shot down by the German fighters.
Well, military, I mean, the military, the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, whatever they are, they love having toys, war toys. They love having the idea of developing some new technology, some new faster plane. It's like, you know, I mean, when I was younger, I wanted to have a car that went faster. You know, we wanted to have this mechanical thing. It was sort of a macho thing. But so they end up, I guess you can sort of understand in a way, because it's not their money. In fact, the more of these absurd programs they built, the more the staff officers and the Pentagon officers the more demand there is for them. One of the costs of increasing costs in the military, I just want to, as a little bit of a side here, is an incredible increase in the number of, what do they call it, flag
officers.
Flag officers. I have a chart here showing that since in World War II, at the end of World War II, there were approximately one flag officer for every 15,000 or 20,000 troops, uniformed personnel. Well, I'm sorry, yeah, 1.7 for every 10,000 uniformed personnel. And by Korea, that went up to about 3. By Vietnam, it was about a little under 4. During the Cold War period, interim period, it was up to about 5. And the Afghan War began, it was about 6. And in 2010, it was over 7. So since World War II, they've quadrupled the number of these flag officers who are not cheap.
Yeah.
You know,
no.
There's a huge number, hundreds of them. It's not just
and
a few
the amount
officers.
of money that it costs when they retire, and they retire fairly young, and by today's
The
standards,
average retirement?
They can retire when they're 50, 55 years old.
And the average retirement for the flag officers, according to the information now, is like $247,000. Not average, I'm sorry, up to $247,000, from $190,000 to $240,000 a year retirement costs, and their average salary cost is about the same amount, not $190,000 plus 30% overhead. So, you know, I don't want to be picking on this, but there's this. They continue to expand their nest, and by having more programs to administer, more money to administer, the more staff officers, and well, you know, they were building a new golf course outside the Pentagon for several millions of dollars, and one of the officers was interviewed as, well, why was this necessary? Was proposing the golf course and expansion, and he says, well, you have to understand that on Saturday morning we have officers standing on each other trying to play golf. That's his idea of necessity, is that they want to be able to play golf more conveniently, and the rest of us can pay for it. So anyway, let's go back to this F-35 bomber plane that you mentioned, just to make sure that people
and you call
understand
it a bomber, which is more true than a fighter, because it's not.
Fighter, bomber.
The planes do not come together anymore like they used to, and shoot their machine guns at the other plane.
Well,
they're off 50, 60 miles away, and launching their missiles that would hit something.
The public needs to understand, you know, they think of a plane as just, well, it's a plane. That's, you know, we build a few planes and we have to fly them around. But these are not just planes. These are what they call weapon systems, I guess. These are, they want to buy 2,443, according to the numbers I saw of these, at a price tag of $382 billion.
Repeat that.
$382 billion.
Yeah.
And we can't afford, you know, food stamps or preschool or Medicare for all. $382 billion, and the Government Accountability Office says that if we do this, the maintenance of over the lifetime of these things will of these planes, if they build no more, just keeping them in the air and keeping them moving, will make the total well over $1 trillion of funds to just have this one weapon system, quote unquote, that, as you point out, isn't necessary and is probably almost obsolete already because of the increased use of drones and satellites and other forms of weaponry.
Yes.
So this is another one of these things that's just going to never get used in the course of its lifetime, will only serve to enrich a few corporations and a few employees, and will harm the American public once again. public needs to understand the immensity of these numbers. Each plane will be from 182 million to 299 million per plane.
Yeah, that should boggle the minds of our voting public. That much per plane, when back in World War II, the B-17 bomber only cost into the thousands per plane, not 100,000, less than that. And now we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars per airplane.
Hundreds of millions per airplane and support and all the other costs that are associated with it. Another example of this type of boondoggle that the Defense Department refuses to give up is what they call the RQ-4 Global Hawk. It's a huge drone that's supposed to fly on its own around the world and replacing the U-2 spy planes. Okay, so the U-2 spy planes, we have 100 and some of those, as I understand it, and they've been around for 40 years, and they've done the job more than adequately, and they're being outdated by the use of satellites. But the military is not satisfied with that. They want to play with another kind of machine, a drone, that would do the same function as U-2s did or satellites do, and these are priced at least $35 million per plane.
And it's interesting to point out that
Priced in 2005 at 35 million. Now they're talking about 227 million per plane.
And what are these drones used for? For bombing Pakistan, bombing in Yemen, bombing in other places. These are countries that we have no right to be in at all.
This is a spy drone. It's not going to bomb yet. But the point, we can get into the other drones. I mean, the other idea, I saw in the LA Times a few days ago that a local company out in the San Fernando Valley, in the business section, who makes these little small drones, the ones you're talking about, and others, just announced a record quarterly profit. And that's the other side of this. That's why there's always somebody lobbying, somebody supporting this sort of thing. Nobody's lobbying for another school that has the same access to the politicians that these folks have.
But we should point out it's our elected representatives, and we really don't have a choice because we might, Glenn and I might say that the Democratic candidate is a little better than the Republican candidate, but not good enough to correct the mistakes that our country has moved into.
Right. Well, we're getting ready to wind up here, and I think I'd like to go back to the Eisenhower quote again and remind people that Dwight Eisenhower, the Allied commander-in-chief in World War II, who saw some of the greatest death and destruction in the history of humankind, every gun that is made, every warship that is launched, every rocket fired is a theft from those who hunger. So with that, I'm going to leave the program and thank Ali Atachak and Juanita Chatham and Liz Burke for their help in getting this production on the air. And Bud, I thank you for your insight into this war effort that you have protested for so long.
You do an excellent job, Glenn.